Hello?
Tom?
Yes.
Hi, it's Sean.
I'm sorry about the
No,
delay. I never miss
no.
anything. And then on top of it all, the computer wants to update Skype and it's taking 15 minutes. So I just shut that down.
Okay. Yeah, well, it's no problem. I'd be happy to do this anytime. And to be completely honest with you, Tom, I was a little relieved when you didn't pick up, and I was thinking maybe we could reschedule because I'm a little nervous.
Oh, why?
Because I know a lot more than my neighbors and friends and colleagues about a lot of stuff, and you know a hell of a lot more about everything else than I do. So,
Oh, that's very nice of you to say. But I'll tell you, I have a little show now, and I interviewed Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull. Now I've been listening to his music since I was 14. The guy could do no wrong in my eyes. He's absolutely unbelievable. And I was like a nervous wreck through the whole thing.
I bet it went well, though.
But it went great, right, because he was great. But I just can't believe anybody would feel that way about me. Like Ian Anderson, that's one thing. If I'm Ian Anderson, you better be worried.
Well, you're Ian Anderson in the Patriot movement, in the Liberty
Oh,
movement.
thanks.
I guess we can just jump right in, and this will be a little atypical start. I like to start these things off a little bit more polished, but now I want to include everything that we've just talked about, because one of the things, Tom, is that you're a hip scholar. Right? I mean, you've got a great sense of humor. The interview with a zombie video, and you're approachable, and you're likable. We can talk about all that, and I should probably do a proper introduction. Guys, thanks so much for joining us today at sgtreport.com. I sure do appreciate it. On the line, one of the coolest cats in the world, Tom Woods, a champion of liberty, senior fellow over at the Mises Institute, and a New York Times best-selling author with books like Nullification, How to Resist Federal Tyranny in the 21st Century, and 10 other books, including Rollback, Repealing Big Government Before the Coming Economic Collapse, and the wonderfully titled The Politically Incorrect Guide to American History. Tom Woods also has the website tomwoods.com. Tom, thank you so much for taking the time today to join us.
I'm glad to do it. I just want you to know that I'm sitting outside actually on my front porch because I have the kids home today, and sometimes there are quiet places in the house, but I can't be certain of that. So I'm out here. So if you hear background noise, wind, tornadoes, whatever, a snake or whatever, this is real life in Kansas.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I have several of them myself downstairs, and if you hear any creepy crawly lizards, bunnies, a cat, or a dog, we have them all, and or kids barking. Those would be mine on this end.
Yeah.
Tom, I just wanted to ask you a couple of things today. Actually, one of the things that makes it hard to talk to a person like you is that there are so many avenues we could go down and so many things we could talk about. So what I did is I reached out to the readers at SGT Report to ask them what their best single question would be for you. So if you don't mind, we could go through those in a little bit.
Oh, that's funny because I've been doing that on my own on the Tom Woods show. Sometimes I'll say, I can ask Ron Paul some questions, but I bet you guys have better ones than I do. And then I outsource it, and yeah, I get questions that would never have occurred to me that actually are quite interesting. But it's fun to ask other people those questions. I'm a little nervous to be asked those questions, but we'll see. All right.
Well, they're right up your alley because what continues to rise to the top is the idea of nullification and secession, and there's literally nobody better to ask about that than you, Tom Woods. Getting back to this idea, though, that you're a hip scholar, I really truly mean that, but what I've been finding is that there are a lot of approachable hip scholars in the liberty movement. Ron Paul certainly seems to be one. We just talked to Peter Schiff last week. I know you and he are friends, and you sometimes host the Peter Schiff Show. Do you think it's because we're all liberty-minded that we are down-to-earth people, and because we do have the best interests of our fellow citizens and the country at heart, that you'd be eager to take my call, that you'd even be willing to take my call? I just think that's really cool.
Oh, well, thanks. I mean, I guess there are a couple of ways I would answer that. One is when you hold the sorts of views that we hold, no matter what your credentials are, and I have a lot of good mainstream credentials, but no matter what your credentials are, you're not going to be held in super high regard in academia. Now, in my case, I'm happy that some of my more scholarly books have gotten really good reviews in academic journals and stuff like that. But my really popular stuff is not really held in high regard by a lot of these professor types. So I just go around assuming that I'm not liked. And so when somebody calls me up and wants to do a friendly interview, well, hey, I'm pretty okay with that. So, I mean, I think it's just the experience of being a liberty-minded person in a not very liberty-minded academic community. It brings you right down to earth. We'll put it that way. That brings you right down to earth. But I guess the other thing is, when my book Meltdown came out, that was, oh my goodness, that's almost that's going on 5 years ago because it was early 2009. That book was my second most successful book because that was on the financial crisis. Ron Paul wrote the foreword, and I wrote it because I felt like if I don't write this, I'm afraid there won't be a free market book on the subject fast enough to counter all the Paul Krugman style books that are sure to come out. And after that book came out, I don't know what happened. I mean, I was doing pretty well. I had Politically Incorrect Guide to American History was a big seller and all that, but something happened between the time I wrote Meltdown and the time after I wrote it where all of a sudden it was just absolutely crazy. I would go to events, people want autographs, they want pictures with me, I'm mobbed by people. And I just turned to my wife and said, "What in the world is going on here? Like, I have no idea what happened. I'm exactly the same guy I was 2 weeks ago when nobody cared about about me." So I guess I'm down to earth because I still feel like I'm just this regular guy. I mean, I'm just a guy who writes some books, and then all of a sudden people started liking them. I don't know what happened.
Well, they say, do what you love and success will follow. And I think, around that time that you released that book, there was just such an emergence of love of liberty again. And, the Ron Paul campaign and the Campaign for Liberty, which I think you directly helped co-found. Isn't that true?
I don't think I'm in their good graces today. I did write the mission statement and the statement of principles for Campaign for Liberty.
Well, then let me ask you this, though. You talk about, your education, very establishment, mainstream. Given your impressive, largely establishment educational background with a degree in history from Harvard and a master's and a PhD from Columbia, how did you manage to escape with your critical thinking skills and your soul, where so many of your contemporaries are willing servants to this obviously corrupt system?
Well, one thing I tell people who are sending their kids off to college and they're worried that when my kid gets to college, he's going to be brainwashed into believing in socialism or something. First of all, if you've done a good job with your kids and they have their heads screwed on right, they'll probably be okay. But what they should do when they get there is seek out student groups that consist of like-minded students, not so that they can live in complete isolation during their whole time, but just so they can keep their sanity. And remember, yes, some people do believe the way I do. And sometimes, and I wrote for a student publication, I belong to student groups like that, and people would say, "Well, you're just preaching to the choir." Maybe we were, I don't know. But the fact is, when you are in a hostile environment and you're in the choir, you need to be preached to for your own sanity. So that's one of the things that I did, is that I just joined groups of like-minded people, and that helped keep me on the right track. But then it also helped me to become more consistent. When I entered college, I was all over the place ideologically. I mean, I was like a middle-of-the-road Republican. So I favored some spending cuts, but let's not be too hasty. And I was for every military intervention you could imagine. And when I got to college, I came from a sort of conservative New England town, and I got to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I'm surrounded by, I mean, just absolute lunatics in the city of Cambridge. So that really had the opposite effect on me that it might have had on some people. It made me think, whatever these crazy people are, I think I want to be the exact opposite. And it forced me to sit down and really examine my views. I mean, if I believe more or less in freedom and more or less in the free market and all these other things, then I really ought to believe them consistently the whole way. And so I started seeking out different. I went to an event of the thing called the Institute for Humane Studies for a week over the summer, and that really solidified me in the free society and all that. And then the next year I went to a seminar put on by the Mises Institute, and I spent a week learning Austrian economics. And that, by the time I got out of college, I really had my head screwed on right. I really knew it, but I sought it out myself because I just knew these crazy people in Cambridge were wrong, and I wanted to be able to equip myself to be able to respond to them. And that just led me to all these institutions. And there was no internet in those days, so I had to really work. Whereas a kid with even a tinge of curiosity today is just one Google search away from an incredible garden of delight in terms of the knowledge that's at your fingertips.
Well, Tom, before we move on to the questions from our readers, one of the things that you say consistently, which I really like, is, and it's absolutely one of the litmus tests of you being a truth teller among everything else, including, of course, your entire body of work. But you always like to say that the right and the left are both corrupt, and the right has been taken over by the neocons, whereas the left, my words here, is essentially now borderline communist. I wanted to get your thoughts on Obamacare because, in my estimation, there's just no better example of how big government combined with maybe a communist, Marxist leaning is literally going to take our entire society right off the edge of the cliff. Where do you stand on Obamacare? What do we do about it, and how do we turn back the tide?
Well, this is a very hard question to answer. I mean, I've heard people talk about this, and the most effective people are the ones who really, really know all the technical ins and outs of this thing. And I will tell you, I'm not one of those people. I have not read the 8 gazillion pages of the legislation and then the 80 gazillion pages of subsequent regulations elaborating on the legislation. But people who have, I mean, my view is that if you look in there enough, you'll probably find various types of loopholes that you can use, or areas where the cooperation of the states would be necessary. You just don't give that cooperation would be one thing. I mean, I, I think some of us feel like maybe it'll just go away because the rollout was so bad. But that's unfortunately wishful thinking. And also, a lot of people are finding that, contrary to what they were told, they actually have. I just last night talking to somebody who had this experience. They now are going to have a plan that has fewer benefits than they had before and is pricier than
Right.
the one that they had before.
Right.
But the problem is that the number of people who will benefit from this thing will be substantial enough that it will be very difficult to reverse it. So, as I say, there are probably ways here that, I mean, just saying let's nullify Obamacare is easier said than done, because the key plank of the whole thing is the individual mandate. And if you don't buy health insurance that satisfies these people, they're going to fine you. Well, the thing is that if you're expecting a tax refund and the IRS just simply docks your tax refund, I don't see what the states can do to help you. I mean, yes, the states could try something like a tax escrow account where where they collect the federal income taxes and they hold it in escrow until they're convinced the federal government's only going to spend it on constitutional stuff. But public opinion is just not ready for that right now. That's the problem. And that's a great idea, but public opinion, I mean, remember, most people are educated in government run schools where they learn the Alexander Hamilton, Henry Clay, Joseph Story, Daniel Webster theory of the Union, which their theory of the Union is the federal government issues orders and you shut your mouth and accept them. And that's what people believe. So at this point, there isn't a whole lot we can do other than use the unconventional means we have of the internet and programs like yours to get around these gatekeepers of opinion, to encourage homeschooling, to encourage independent thought, and to even think, to start talking openly about what to many people might seem like outlandish ideas, but I think we have to talk about secession and options like that. And yes, when people first hear this, they'll say, "Oh, well, that's crazy." But you know what? A lot of things that people hear for the first time, they say are crazy, and 20 years later, they become a constitutional right. You know, you have to start somewhere.
That's right. And one glimmer of hope as it pertains to Obamacare is that I saw a statistic from Zero Hedge just the other day saying that only 18% of the uninsured have shown any interest or made any attempt to sign up for Obamacare. So I guess just like the corrupt federal government, we can hope that sooner or later this thing collapses under its own weight. And speaking of gatekeepers, you mentioned gatekeeping media, Tom. Did you see this? This came out from Breitbart yesterday that CNN is turning its back on news and it's going to move forward and do more reality TV documentaries and non-news programming. I think it's just another great example of how the alternative, the truthful media, the media that is out there that isn't the mainstream mockingbird media, is eating the lunch of the establishment. And I think that's an additional glimmer of hope, is it not?
Yeah, I hadn't seen that item, but that does indicate that there. If this is true, then it means that CNN is more or less throwing in the towel and saying that our attempts to tell the American public what to think and what stories are newsworthy and how to slant them is just not working to a point where it's a going concern for us. So that is very encouraging to me, because now people will indeed will be increasingly getting their information from alternative sources. Now, of course, politically in the short run, the problem is that disproportionately older people go out and vote. That's just a fact. I mean, you can explain why that is or what you can do about it, but the fact is they are the ones who go out and vote. I stood at the polling place when I used to live in Alabama in 2008 on Super Tuesday. And I'll tell you, the demographic that I saw, I mean, these were people who, if voting was the last thing they did, that was what they were going to do that day. It was unbelievable in terms of the age range. I mean, the over 65s vastly dominated, and it's the over 65s who are still basically waiting for the equivalent of Walter Cronkite to tell them what to think in totally conventional ways. And so, in the short run, that's an issue. We've got the internet and all that, but the people who actually are pulling those levers are completely unaffected by this.
It's so true, and it's disturbing because you're right. The young people aren't getting out and voting and taking part in the republic. I think that's because people have lost total faith in the system, in the polling, in the poll results, in the counting of the votes. It's been pretty clear for quite some time that they can just steal elections to some degree, and in some states. We don't really have to get into that too deeply, but I think that is part of the problem. Is people have become very disillusioned with what previously had been thought of to be a free society.
And I think some people, after, I mean, most people are not just that politically motivated. And I don't mean go out and vote and support candidates, but what I mean is when Ron Paul was running for president those two times, a lot of people, myself included, who don't normally follow the news when it comes to elections, were just glued to the computer screen. Like I wanted to watch every Ron Paul video I could. What did he do today?
That's
What
right.
interview did he do today? What speech did he give? How big was the crowd? I was fascinated by that. And then when it's all over, I think there are some people who feel like, well, boy, I'm disappointed. That didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. And then they go and do something else. And there's only a small fraction of us who say, well, we're just getting started. We gotta roll up our sleeves and keep on going. So we have to try and go and find those stray sheep the best we can and say, hey, look, yeah, Ron Paul's not running anymore, but he's still out there fighting the fight. He expects you to help.
So many of us were inspired by the Ron Paul revolution, the campaign. I, among them, I couldn't get enough of it. And there are some great videos out there, Tom. You've probably seen them now that document how the election, how everything really was stolen from Ron Paul by the establishment media, from the straw polls, right on up to actual election results, reporting of election results where they would name the top 3 or 4 finishers. Ron Paul would come in second and they wouldn't name him or show his name. And it plays into this idea that CNN can no longer get away with ad hominem attacks like teabaggers and tenthers, and all of the stuff that has driven their ratings to all-time lows has backfired on them, because whether it's wishful thinking or not, there seems to be a real awakening in this country. Maybe this is a good time to segue over and talk about state nullification. I should tell everybody that Tom Woods has a site, statenullification.com. I think it's very apropos that you guys know that as we begin to talk about this. So the first question I'll lay out there comes from our contributor, Rory, Tom, and he wants to know, with all the talk coming out of Northern California regarding secession, the state of Jefferson, what are the odds of the federal government, quote unquote, allowing that to come to fruition? And part 2 is, could you explain to our audience how nullification and secession are tied together and why they are important to each individual citizen in this nation?
Okay, let me take the second one first. How are nullification and secession related? Well, there's a sense in which they're not and a sense in which they are. The sense in which they're not is that somebody like, well, nobody likes to mention John C. Calhoun. I don't know why, because he was a really smart guy. But Calhoun's view was that nullification was the moderate alternative to secession. And likewise, Jefferson's view is that nullification was the moderate alternative, that you can retain whatever benefits come from being in the Union, but nevertheless protest vigorously against and refuse to comply with something that's unconstitutional. So it's an alternative to secession in that sense. But in another sense, they both grow out of the same sort of political philosophy. They both grow out of the compact theory of the Union, which says that the primary bodies that make up the United States are the states, and there's ample proof of this. If you, I've written an awful lot about this. I have a chapter in my book Nullification that defends the compact theory of the Union, because it's not even a compact theory; it's the compact fact that the states came first, and because the states came first, the peoples of those states are the sovereign bodies. And what it means to be sovereign is that you have the final say, that there is nobody who is over you, who can second guess you or overrule you. Now, if that's the case, then nullification and secession both follow. Because yes, you may create a federal government to perform a certain limited number of functions, and you may create a judicial system to monitor that government. But all those things are your creations. And if those things do something that is going to destroy you yourself, well, you yourself remain the sovereign. You have the right to defend yourself against that. That's what sovereignty is. So don't tell me you believe in state sovereignty, but you don't believe in nullification. No such thing. If you believe in the sovereignty of the peoples of the states, that is nullification. That means that we are the ones who have the final say in the last resort. Now, in ordinary circumstances, we may well defer to the courts, but in an extreme case, we have to exert our sovereignty. And likewise, that would also hold for the ultimate question of where do we want the final political say to reside? Do we want to be ruled over by Washington D.C., or do we maybe want to return to self-government just in our own state and withdraw from the union? Well, the decision to join or withdraw from a federation is a decision made by a sovereign. And if you are a sovereign, you can make that decision. And nobody, certainly not something you yourself created. What kind of bizarre logic is that? I create this thing, and then it can come kill hundreds of thousands of my people because I want to leave it? Like, who ever heard of such a thing? It's ridiculous. So that's that. Now, in terms of California, well, there's also a movement in Colorado to secede from Colorado. I just had somebody on, I hosted the Peter Schiff show last week, and I had somebody from the 51st State Project on 51ststate.org, and they're eager to have themselves be the 51st state. Now, I think that's all great because it gets secession talked about, and that's good. It brings the progressives out and it exposes them for the shills, for the establishment that they are. Here they are supposed to be, oh, we're such independent thinkers, we're progressives, man. We think for ourselves. We got free minds. But when push comes to shove, they just join with the establishment. They'll join with Dick Cheney on an issue like this.
Right.
Absolutely. The progressives are basically Dick Cheney with sandals.
Right.
There is no difference. Because Dick Cheney, of course, believes in one nation indivisible, which isn't even what these Colorado and California people are questioning. They're not even trying to break away from the Union. They're just saying maybe we should have one more state. And there is such a prejudice and superstition against secession of any kind that, like, all political borders now drawn are sacred and holy, not to be touched by our grimy hands. Like, what? Political borders, if they have any purpose at all, are just for convenience, right? And if they're not serving their original purpose, why the heck not change them? And here we have the progressives who are so open-minded, who just give you the same old nationalistic 19th century union. We're going to burn your city down if you don't like the current political borders we have. What in the world is progressive about that?
I agree with you. And state nullification was a Jeffersonian idea. So maybe this ties into a question from John Dwyer, who asks you, which president do you feel was most true to the Constitution?
Good question. Well, in terms of fidelity to the Constitution, probably I often point to an obscure president, no surprise there, Martin Van Buren, who was elected in 1836. And I like him because he was under. No, was he perfect? No, none of these people were. He was very bad on the Indian question. But on the other hand, 99.9% of the public was bad on the Indian question at that point. But in terms of how was he faithful to the Constitution, well, I think pretty well. I mean, at that time, the Panic of 1837 had people calling for federal intervention into the economy, and he said, "Sorry, that's unconstitutional. I can't do that." And he managed to avoid war with England, and he managed to avoid war with Mexico. And it's under pressure of war that oftentimes we see the Constitution most trampled, and he managed to avoid those.
Well, let me ask you this one. These are in no particular order, so if there's anything repetitive, we can just move on. I'll just read them. This one is from Postoto, and his question is, he hears a lot from patriot, like-minded people that if we could only restore the Constitution and abide by it, our country would return to its former glory. However, even if it is feasible to possibly throw off all the criminal politicians and throw the bankers in jail and end the Fed and restore liberty in the Constitution, how long do you think it would take before our country found itself right back in the same situation, Tom?
Well, that's exactly the issue, that there's no incentive that anybody in the regime has to keep the government limited. Why would they want to? What possible reason would they have? The sort of people who are attracted to it are power-hungry lunatics. They want power, and certainly they want wealth. I mean, this is why they do what they do. And they want to reward their constituents, and they want, I mean, this is what they are there for. So they're not going to say, well, I'm sorry, we're constrained by the Constitution. I just can't give you this thing, especially when most of the public right now, let's be honest, most of them, if they really understood what constitutional government would mean, they would revolt. They would not want it. They would not, they want their goodies. So, given the state of the public, that's right. It would be very hard to stop it from just starting right on up again. Which is why I want to go. I just give. I don't say let's go back to the Constitution. I don't. I say the Constitution had a lot of time to work, and it obviously hasn't. Now then people say, oh, but you can't blame the Constitution. Blame the people who didn't abide by it. That's too easy. Like that's way too easy. Because if the Constitution had been written well, then they would have to abide by it. There would be penalties for not abiding by it. We wouldn't have the government we have now, and obviously we do. It's a creation of man, and it has failed dramatically.
Well, one devil's advocate to that, and I'd like your opinion on this too, because I know people are thinking it as they listen to you say that. There are laws on the books to punish people who rape here and in the UK. And if you look at a guy like Jimmy Savile, the BBC personality who apparently was a rapist and a pedophile and went to his death without ever having been punished for those crimes, it seems to the common man, Tom, that those that are well connected, part of the establishment, never have to abide by the laws. Dick Cheney never has to abide by the laws. And that's the problem, is that the bad guys never pay penalties in this country anymore. There is no rule of law.
Okay, well now we get to the real heart of it. Why is there no rule of law? Answer: because the people who are committing these crimes, who are doing things, the sorts of things that Dick Cheney and Bush and Obama do, they're part of the government. Now, who is given the task of maintaining law and order? The same institution these people belong to.
Right.
So there's no reason to expect that it's like for example, anytime you hear, well, there's been some corruption, we're gonna, or there's been some terrible event like 9/11 or
Fast and Furious.
Fast and Furious, whatever. We're
Benghazi.
going to have an impartial federal investigation. You know what that means. It means whitewash.
That's
We
right.
all know that. There is no way any federal investigation is going to uncover anything about anybody. That is just an absolute guarantee. Maybe to make people satisfied, it'll uncover one lowly guy, second rung of the totem pole, and blame that person. But that's what they do. So now is when you start to get into radical libertarian thinking, and this is what led me there, is the thinking that if the institution that is supposed to be limited is, I mean, when we have the government, we're supposed to have a limited government, and we're supposed to make sure that nobody violates the Constitution and all that. But the same institution that these people are running is the same institution that's supposed to keep an eye on them. Well, why would it? Like, they're the ones running it. Why would they keep an eye on themselves? Who will guard the guardians? Was the old Latin saying, and we're now faced with that right now. So maybe we need to think about, and this would have to be a whole other show, but maybe the whole idea, especially this modern style of government and state, uh, it's bound to fail from the point of view of freedom. It is bound to fail because it monopolizes the the maintenance of law and order when that's exactly what we need in order to go after people who are violating the law. If the people who are violating the law are part of the institution that enforces the law, they're going to get away with it.
What a perfect timing for this discussion with the 50th anniversary of the assassination of JFK coming up, and the crooked Warren Commission that had bankers on it and all sorts of globalists on it. And of course the fix was in. And to your point, Tom, the fix is always in. If we look at the Justice Department, if we look at Eric Holder and the way he's behaved, and contempt of Congress, and having to investigate himself essentially, and the rule of law in this country has been destroyed. And I think that's why people are so darn frustrated and really at their wits' ends, which is a nice segue to this next question from Pete Devine, who is wondering what your perspective of the United States will be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and based on your vision, what would you advise the middle class to do today?
Oh, golly. Well, I don't know. I think 5 years from now it'll be more or less the same, slightly more stagnant. But I do think that eventually we do get out of this. And because I think eventually the federal government has simply overpromised, and it will have to renege on some major promises that it's made, and this will leave a real scar on people, and it will make them less likely to trust this thing in the future. And that's the silver lining of it, is that when that happens, then there's a potential for an ideological restructuring of the country. That people won't be suckers as uh, as readily again, and then we can rebuild at that point. I mean, we have a lot of great there are a lot of great features of the U.S. We have a lot of, I mean, not just natural resources, but we have a hardworking population. We have 50 states with at least some kind of decentralized power. I mean, we have a lot of ingenuity and inventiveness here. There's no reason we shouldn't be flourishing. And so now, when are these promises going to come due that the federal government can't keep? Probably sometime in the next generation. I can't date it more precisely than that. But what should you do in the meantime? Well, in the meantime, it's hard to say exactly. Like I'm not going to give advice on what you should invest in and stuff
Right.
like that.
Right.
I do think though that instead of saying, well, I'll rely on the government to give me my money in for my retirement and whatever, or I'll rely on my mutual fund or something, and that will see me through. I think it's better to try and come up with income streams that are not dependent on government and that are not dependent on a Dave Ramsey sort of scenario in which you're going to have a mutual fund that will compound 12% annually. It's not the year 2000 anymore. So now these things may seem out of reach for the middle class, but it depends on what kind of lifestyle you want to lead, what kind of sacrifices you're prepared to make. But one recommendation is try to find they don't have to be expensive, uh, but you go to like I can't remember the guy's name now who does these seminars, but he does these excellent seminars where he shows you how to locate properties that you buy. You don't have to pay cash for them, certainly, but you use the renters in the property to pay the mortgage on the property, so you're not out of pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And then after 30 years, this becomes, once you've paid off the mortgage, this becomes an income stream for you that does not rely on the government being solvent or on a mutual fund working out for you. Looking for independent income streams rather than saying I've got a retirement account and that's going to see me through, I think is the better solution. There are a lot of people online, for example, who have figured out ways to generate income, an independent income stream via the internet. My friend Jack Spirko, for example, runs the Survival Podcast, thesurvivalpodcast.com. Now, he has made that into that's a source of information for, he gets 85,000 downloads a show. It's valuable information that people would like to have. He gives it away for free, but he's also got a business model whereby he actually earns an income doing this, and it's almost a passive income in some ways. We have to be clever and entrepreneurial and think. We can't just say, well, what's the easy path? Tell me where I should put my money, and I'll just sit back and it'll automatically happen. We don't live in that world anymore.
It's a great example of free market because if you take a look at guys like Pierce Morgan, and by the way, this is why the CNN model is breaking and it doesn't work. They're paying him what, $7, $8, $9 million a year to lie to the American people, and 400,000 viewers a night is not enough viewers to sustain that model. That is not enough viewers in this current television industry to pay that man $8 million a year to spew his opinions for an hour. That's why that model's not working. And those that are embracing the free market and trying to combat that, more power to you if you can figure out a way like Jack Spirko has to make a little money. We're doing a little advertising here on SGT Report, and it helps keep the wheels turning. So I always like to say support the pirate ship. Just stop by. We don't ask for donations. We don't ask you for your money. We don't sell subscriptions. We got some advertisers on here, and I'm just saying please, support them because they're helping to provide this information. Buy Tom's books. I mean, help support Tom so that he can keep this information coming. How much more time do you have? Can you give me another 10 minutes?
I could probably do about another 5 just because
Okay.
I got a big family thing going on here today.
Okay. Well, you've been very generous with your time. Let's just go another 5 minutes if that's okay with you, Tom.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. And here's what we'll do. We will jump down to this one. I don't know how you feel about this question. I'll just read it. I don't know enough about it to interject. This one's from Larry from Montreal, and he wants to know what are the main points of difference between your Austrian school and that which Max Kaiser is peddling. Scarlett jumps in and says, wondering when the Mises Institute will debate with Professor Antal Fekete of the New Austrian School of Economics over the differences in interpretations of the economy?
Well, I mean, I think it's a little bit technical, and I'm not familiar enough with his work to be able to say. I mean, Max Kaiser, I don't think really understands the difference between the sort of mainstream Austrian school and the guests he has on. I mean, because I can tell that based on what he writes about it and the nasty tweets he sends my way. I mean, it's extremely ungentlemanly. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure Bob Murphy would probably debate pretty much anybody. If all they have to do is just drop a note to Bob Murphy. Bob's a scholar of the Mises Institute, and he would do it. But when you look at the issues that they're talking about, it's not that I don't say that they're stupid or whatever, but they're highly technical. Like, they're not the sort of topics that people talk about on a podcast. But if Bob wants to do that, and I wouldn't be surprised if he did, I think that'd be interesting.
Okay. Yeah, this one's a little bit over my head. I haven't been following that. I don't know anything about any nasty tweets from Max to you.
Yeah,
or any...
no. I mean, I don't dwell on that
Yeah,
stuff. I mean,
well,
he does that to me once in a while. I usually just say something funny in return, which I think angers him. He wants me to get all upset, and I just say something funny, and so he leaves me alone.
okay. Well, we do not like to promote any infighting in the Liberty. I think we're all liberty-minded, and it's important that we stand together because the divide and conquer element is just too strong. There's no reason for us to infight. My apologies to anybody if we didn't get to your question. We're just out of time with Tom. We sure do appreciate your time, and you guys have to remember, too, that Tom has put all of the information out there. You just need to reach out and get it. Visit him at tomwoods.com. Also the website, statenullification.com. Tom, any other last words of advice or wisdom for us as we move into this uncertain future here in America?
Well, let's all stick together. Don't give up. Don't get discouraged, even though it is very discouraging. Think of how discouraging it was 40 years ago, holding the views that you have now, where like you're Ron Paul and you speak to a group and there are 10 people there. I mean, things have improved in some ways, so take heart in that. And then finally, I would say, I hope you guys. I hope this won't seem like I'm trying to compete with you guys, but I do have a weekday show now at tomwoodsradio.com, and so far it is the top-rated libertarian podcast on iTunes. So if you can visit me at tomwoodsradio.com, we have the show every day at noon Eastern. But then after that, you can get it as a podcast. You can download it, listen to it at your convenience. But I have some pretty good guests on there, and I bring people on who are not carbon copies of myself, because if I want a carbon copy of myself, I'll just have myself. I'll just sit there and talk. But
Right.
I want to bring on people who have knowledge that I don't have, and where I can help to fill in my own gaps, and I can learn something while everybody else is learning. And that's for free. I don't charge anything for that. I mean, if you want to donate Bitcoins, you can. But just if you just want to listen to the show, that's great too.
Well, Tom, thanks so much for your time, and everybody check out Tom's work at tomwoods.com and check out the radio show, too. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.